to the May 31st, 2023 special meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin, as a courtesy to others, we ask that you please silence your cell phones or any other noise devices. I want to go over a few reminders to the public regarding public comments. If you would like to address the board, if you would like to fill out a request to speak card, you must do so and give it to the clerk prior to the announcement of the agenda item. If you would like to speak on an item not listed on the agenda, on the consent calendar, as of tonight, we don't have a consent calendar, you must do so under public forum. Again, if you would like to speak on a particular agenda item, you must file a request to speak card prior to the announcement of the agenda item. Please refer to the Rent Board meeting agenda for the list of items, or you can refer to the provided agenda items list for open for public comment, which is posted above the request to speak cards on the table in the front of the chambers. The first item on the agenda is pledge to the flag. Please join me in a pledge of allegiance to the flag. Chair, would you like to make an announcement briefly?
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Just wanted to let everyone know that we have an interpreter present tonight. So if everybody can please make sure to speak slowly, loudly, and clearly to make it easier for everyone, then that would be really helpful. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is roll call. For the purpose of the recording, may I please get an audible roll call from Rent Board members and staff? Board Member Espinoza? Turn your mic. There you go.
Present.
Board Member Height?
Present.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Here.
Chair Cantor?
Here.
Executive Director Nicholas Traylor?
Here.
Deputy Director Fred Tran?
Here.
General Counsel Charles Oshanuga?
I'm here.
Staff Attorney Palomar Sanchez is here. He's in the audience. For the record, Board Member Dawkins is absent. The next item on the agenda is Statement of Conflict of Interest. Are there any? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is Agenda Review. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Are there any changes to the agenda from staff?
No changes.
Are there any other changes to the agenda from board members?
Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is Public Forum. Tonight, for Public Forum, we have 2 speakers. Each speaker shall be allowed up to 2 minutes to address the board. When your name is called, please occupy the seats in the front row directly behind the speaker's podium. When your name is called to address the board, state your name and your city of residence is optional. Please terminate your address to the board when your time expires. We ask that you keep your comments respectful and appropriate. The first speaker is Lorraine Petrie.
Good evening. My name is Lorraine Petrie, housing provider for the city of Richmond for approximately 25 years. So I have a lot of history, I've been working with all types of tenants for several years, Section 8, homeless shelters, working people, all classes of people. So it's come to my attention that, and as you know, we have not, to my knowledge, had the legal advice that the tenants have had. And apparently they're going to be able to allow us to have $70,000 toward our legal advice. And it was stated the other night at a meeting that from Nick that it was only for 5 or less, 5 units or less, meaning 5 doors or less of housing providers, which I adamantly disagreed with because mom and pops definitely make up a different type of environment, meaning you could have 10 units running all your units by yourself, like my husband and I. We manage and do everything on our own. So with that, I think we need to look at what you or whomever came up with the 5 or less for the housing, mom, pop housing, definition of the housing provider, 1. Number 2 is I want to know exactly what the $70,000 is supposed to be allocated for the housing provider. What does that mean? Is that hotline, is that going to be identical to what tenants get for their legal assistance, if you will? Because there's been a lot of things that have not been fair for housing providers, as you know, over the several years. And I would like to also comment on the fact that there's no housing providers on the board. How is, so I'm thinking that that is just, to me, a totally unfair representative of our community, because as you know, tenants and housing providers should be working together. And if you are a tenant and who have never owned a property or managed a property, was a housing provider, unfortunately, you don't understand what it takes to do it. And so what you don't know, you don't know. It's not your fault. But see, that's why it's important to have input from all constituents that make up the tenant and the housing provider. Because we are a team.
Oh, I'm so sorry, your time has expired.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Ilana Clark.
Hi, my name is Ilana Clark, and I've been a resident of Richmond for about 20 years. So apparently, board member Ms. Check stated that, on social media, stated that no housing providers could be found for this board, which is why it's all a renter board for the first time. Not sure what happened or if Ms. Check knew about the applications that were submitted by Vasilas and O'Connor, who would have re-upped if they had been given the opportunity. Not sure how she can be unaware of that since she was on the board with both of these housing provider members. Personally, I think maybe she sees that the optics of having this issue isn't good, to not have a balanced board, but they're covered by the language of Measure L. You can have an all-renter board. I don't understand why she feels like she needs to lie about it. It makes me feel like maybe she knows she's doing something that's not right. And these board members, potential board members, previous board members, are still available. Their paperwork is in, they have been ignored. I have been here since the beginning. Nobody reached out to me. I've met Ms. Check. I just don't understand why the dishonesty. And I think that that needs to be considered. Thank you.
That was the last speaker. The next item on the agenda is item F1 under Rent Board as a whole. Item F1 is to receive the agenda report and discuss the objective of the fiscal year 2023 through 2024 rent program operating budget, options and corresponding rental housing fee, and approve option B. There are 2 speakers on this item.
Thank you. We will now hear the staff report.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Cantor and members of the Rent Board. My name is Nicholas Traylor, and I'm the Executive Director of the Richmond Rent Program. The item before you this evening is a proposed budget and rental housing fee options for the upcoming fiscal year based on direction provided to staff at the May 17, 2023 regular meeting of the Richmond Rent Board. Before we begin this presentation, I want to acknowledge the outstanding work of Rent Program staff, pivoting very quickly to design the proposed budget options based on the priorities of the board, And special acknowledgement should go to Fred Tran, our Deputy Director, who has tirelessly moved numbers around to figure it all out. So thank you for that. So we start with the statement of the issue. And by the way, I normally don't wear glasses, but my reading, I've noticed recently, I can't read without glasses. So the statement of the issue is that as follows. Section 11.100.060N of the rent ordinance requires that the board hold a public hearing and adopt an annual budget for the upcoming fiscal year no later than July 1st. The annual budget is funded by the residential rental housing fee, the amount of which is determined by the City Council following a recommendation from the Rent Board. In consideration of this requirement, staff members will prepare a proposed fiscal year 2023-24 budget with the corresponding rental housing fee for the board's consideration. The purpose of this item is to receive feedback from the board on the proposed budget options based on the direction provided by the board at the May 17, 2023 regular meeting of the Rent Board. Staff have developed two budget options, which the board may adopt and then provide additional direction to staff prior to holding the required public hearing to adopt the final budget and recommended rental housing fee. Budget option A provides for full translation and interpretation of all Rent Board meetings and documents with board meetings held every month. Option A results in a budget of $3,010,115 and a corresponding fee of $221 for fully covered rental units and $125 for partially covered rental units. Option B provides for full translation and interpretation of all Rent Board meetings and documents with board meetings held every other month. Option B results in a budget of $2,967,115 and a corresponding fee of $217 for fully covered rental units and $123 for partially covered rental units. The budget options before you reflect the direction provided by the board at the May 17th regular meeting of the Rent Board. The board directed staff to return with budget options related to three areas. First, interpretation, options for interpretation services at Rent Board meetings and translation of rent program and Rent Board documents. And to be clear, translation and interpretation is not limited to Spanish. It could include any other language. So I want to make sure the board is aware of that. Second, the board directed staff to produce options for conducting hybrid board meetings. In other words, in-person meetings that are simultaneously streamed on a video conferencing platform. And finally, the board directed staff to develop creative outreach strategies to enhance and educate the community about the rent ordinance and services provided by the rent program. So let's begin by going over the historical costs and cost options for interpretation and translation based on the direction provided by the board. And before I go into the cost options, I want the board to know that our cost estimates and our our budgeting this year does not measure the long-term costs. So staff are still going to have to study kind of the long-term costs of including these budget items. So, on average, the rent program spends $7,000 annually on interpretation services in our prior fiscal years. So to provide interpretation services for all rent board meetings, an additional $4,200 will need to be budgeted to provide one interpreter for 3.5 hours for 12 regular rent board meetings and 2 special board meetings. To provide 2 interpreters for 14 meetings would cost $8,400. Now, staff recommend only budgeting for 1 interpreter and allowing the interpreter a break during the meeting to use the bathroom or do whatever they need to do. Staff also recommend budgeting $3,000 for an interpreter's booth, which will make it much easier for the board and the public to understand the interpreter and the presenter, as it significantly reduces the voice of the interpreter in the meeting room. We've made a makeshift interpreter's booth over there, but the professional ones are apparently very effective. The rent program spends on average about $7,000 on written translation for forms, outreach materials, workshop presentations, hearing and appeal documents, among other documents. To translate all of the existing and future rent board and rent program documents, including the agenda packets at 7 cents a word, would cost approximately $35,000 annually based on 14 rent board agenda packets at $2,500 per packet. Translating all hearing appeal records, transcription and translation of the recording of the hearing examiner's decision, the legal recommendation by the rent board's general counsel, rent board regulations, previous decisions and agenda packets and associated documents would cost a one-time amount of $60,000. So that's the catching up of, making sure that all the existing documents are translated. So to support providing the interpretation and translation services as directed by the board, an additional office assistant is required. The additional office assistant, their duties would include acting as an assistant to the rent board clerk, such as taking minutes, managing public comment at rent board meetings, preparing all rent board related documents for translation, arranging the logistics and setup of the bilingual board meetings, assisting with generation of the rent board agenda packets, assisting the hearings coordinator with preparing for rent board hearings, assisting with the preparation of rent board hearing and appeal hearing documents, and preparing hearing recordings for translation. The estimated salary of an office assistant is $54,575. Now, I think it's really important that the board fully understand the impact that translating all of the rent board agenda packets may have on the agency. Translating all rent board agenda packets, and be aware this includes the agenda itself, the agenda report, studies, the attachments, any other documents that are part of the board packet. Translating all of these things will significantly impact staff's ability to manage their normal work and the board's ability to continue to perform at the same historic level. Continuing to hold monthly meetings, frankly, would not be feasible. Staff would have to attempt to complete the comprehensive board packets within a week of the previous board meeting. So let me explain that a little bit more. So to complete an agenda packet, which can be hundreds of pages long and require at minimum several weeks to complete, we must post that packet publicly at least 72 hours prior to each board meeting per the Brown Act. Additionally, the Rent Board holds appeal hearings during their board meetings, which must be published 2 weeks prior to each board meeting. So translating all Rent Board meeting documents, including appeal documents, and preparing for posting will require at least 2 weeks lead time prior to the board meeting. So essentially, to reiterate, that means within a week after a board meeting is held, staff would need to have essentially all agenda items ready and prepared for translation and posting, which is not feasible when you conduct monthly board meetings. Translation of documents, especially an agenda packet, a completed agenda packet, takes approximately 9 to 10 days, which is essentially 2 business weeks. And as I mentioned before, this would mean that to meet the posting requirements, staff would have to complete the agenda packet in 1 week's time, which doesn't allow sufficient time for staff to get the work done in time to translate and post the packet within the requirements of the Brown Act. So based on the number of agenda items staff have historically prepared and anticipate preparing for each board meeting, the delay to translate all Rent Board meeting documents, staff would be unable to hold monthly meetings and prepare the agenda packets and the same number of agenda items at each board meeting if held monthly. So holding monthly meetings and having full translation and interpretation would reduce the quality and quantity of the items that can come before the board, which clearly is not good for the agency, the board, or the community. So I want to be very clear that staff recommend the board hold their meetings every other month in order to accommodate full translation and interpretation. Board members and community members may wonder what the impact of holding meetings every other month may be. And first, I think it's important to know that because the Rent Board has been established for over 5 years, the sheer volume of work that necessitated monthly meetings no longer exists because the foundational work of building up the program and adopting all the required Rent Board regulations has already been accomplished. Additionally, moving to bi-monthly meetings won't impact the Rent program's ability to provide its services, such as counseling, mediation, community education, and outreach, as well as the rent adjustment petition process. And the Rent Board will continue to fulfill its duties to adjudicate appeals without additional delay, as the appeal process generally takes 2 to 4 months to complete, and the board only holds an average of 4 to 5 appeal hearings annually. Furthermore, if there's an important or timely item that needs to be brought before the board can always schedule a special board meeting in between the bi-monthly meetings. And on average, the board typically holds 1 to 2 special meetings a year. Finally, having staff attempt to meet unrealistic deadlines imposed by holding monthly meetings and translating for monthly meetings may lead to burnout, attrition, and day-to-day work and inefficiencies. So in this chart, you can see the difference in cost between option A and option B. The main difference is that translation costs are less in option B because instead of translating for up to 14 meetings, translation would only be required for 7 meetings. Next slide. We have a duty to be, obviously, to provide the board with all of the possible options. And we want to make sure that the board is aware of an alternative option, which is the board could opt to have to budget only for translation, certified translation of the agenda packet, of the agenda, not the agenda packet. And the actual agenda packet would be translated internally by staff, but it would only be for board members and not the public itself. There would be very little negligible fiscal impact to this or organizational impact as staff can use online, no-cost online translation tools with limited editing to provide a translated, albeit a non-certified translation to board members. So staff strongly recommends that the board adopt budget option B. Option B allows for full translation and interpretation of all rent board documents and all rent board meetings, and it makes it feasible for us to do this in a way that is in compliance with the Brown Act. It would also help prevent staff burnout and attrition by allowing for achievable deadlines while maintaining the high work product that has historically been achieved by staff. It also reduces the cost of translation services, at least initially, from $95,000 annually for 12 to 14 meetings to $47,500 annually for 6 to 7 meetings. And finally, it mitigates spending increases in the budget, and when the budget increases, the fees increase. We think it's very important that the board think about the long-term sustainability of the agency. Keeping fees from rising too quickly supports a higher collection rate. Higher collection rate supports the independence of the rent board because if we have a lower collection rate and we end up with a deficit, that could result in us having to borrow from the city's general fund. Once we borrow from the city's general fund, we are now no longer fully independent. And when you're no longer fully independent, that means you don't have as much ability to manage and control your own direction.
So sorry, I think we need a small break for the interpreter.
Sure.
No, necesito que perdí la traducción. I lost the translation.
Oh,
Yeah,
Okay.
I understand.
I can repeat the same
No,
slide.
it's okay, I understand, but I lost now. No, what? It's not working.
her? Can you hear her in the mic?
No, I didn't hear that. I heard her whispering. It sounded like whispers coming.
Board member Tomasa, can you speak into the mic for the interpreter?
Yes, for the interpreter. No te estoy escuchando. Can you hear her?
No te estoy escuchando.
Yeah, she can't hear me because, to be honest, I got a little tripped up there
Okay.
for a lot of these things. So,
Which slide would you like me to go back to? If board member Espinosa is okay.
No, puede continuar con la reunión.
okay. She
Yo
says we can
entendí todo lo que estaba
continue.
diciendo.
Okay, and we
Solo, no se escucha.
okay.
It's not working.
Oh, the technology isn't
It's not working.
Okay, let's take a quick break to fix that issue.
Okay, so
Okay, do we need to to move for recess? Okay, so I'll make a motion that we recess for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay,
Second.
yes, please.
Okay. Board Member Espinoza? Yes?
Yes.
Board Member Height?
Yes.
Vice Chair Guadalupe?
Yes.
And Chair Cantor.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes to break recess for 5 minutes, returning at, where are we at, 5:39, so 5:45? Returning at 5:45.
Okay, we're gonna call the meeting back to order in just a moment. One more minute, or, no, we got, now, okay. Board Member Height, are you present?
I think he is coming.
He might be in the back.
Yes.
And I heard you.
Okay. We'll call the meeting back to order at 5:45.
Okay.
Okay.
Chair Cantor, would you like me to start?
Yes, please,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Board Member Espinoza, do you want me to repeat slide 13?
No.
Okay,
Continue.
okay. Excellent. Okay. So the Rent Board also directed staff to come back with a plan to conduct hybrid Rent Board meetings, or meetings that are held simultaneously in person and via a video conferencing service. Now, staff initially looked into the city's IT department to see if their staff had the bandwidth to assist the rent program with conducting hybrid meetings. We were informed that they are now working with 90 boards and commissions here in the city of Richmond to provide, to try to assist with hybrid meetings, or starting to institute hybrid meetings. And the IT department made it very clear that they would not have the additional bandwidth to provide the rent board and the rent program with their on-site assistance during meetings. However, the cost to conduct hybrid meetings is incorporated into our budget through the interpretation services part of the budget. So $7,200, which is $4,200 for interpretation and $3,000 for the booth, and hiring of an additional office assistant at $54,575. The office assistant would also support the rent board clerk during the hybrid board meetings and monitor the video streaming platform to ensure coordination with the interpreter is continuous. Conducting hybrid meetings is feasible. Staff workload will increase in order to manage the video conferencing or streaming of the meetings. Additional equipment is going to be required for board members. We're still working out the logistics with the IT department. We are also, we've included in the proposed budget funds for board members to receive laptops for the board meetings so that each board member can be part of the video conferencing process. And that's $5,000 for laptops. The final direction that we received from the board at the May 17, 2023 Rent Board meeting was for staff to propose creative ways to conduct community outreach. The role of staff is to create and implement outreach activities that further the purpose of the rent ordinance, Now, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, staff developed a comprehensive outreach plan that obviously was significantly impacted by the pandemic. Now, in its decision-making, the board looks to staff to recommend how much to budget for outreach and education. Staff believe that the current budget amount for outreach and education are adequate to continue to achieve our programmatic goals. And staff will require additional time to explore other types of creative strategies and to budget for that in the future. As I mentioned, we do have a comprehensive outreach plan that we can bring to the board at an upcoming board meeting, and the board can give feedback on that. And I think that would be the appropriate time to do that. So the recommended action tonight is to receive the agenda report and presentation and discuss the objective of the fiscal year 2023-2024 rent program operating budget and corresponding fee, and approve option B. Staff are available to answer any questions the board may have, and thank you for giving me an opportunity to do this presentation.
Thank you for the presentation. Are there any questions from members of the board? Board Member Espinoza.
Sí, tengo algunas preguntas acerca de lo que acaba de decir.
Yes, I have a few questions about what he just said.
Bueno, cuando está diciendo que los costos de la presentación y los registros de apelación, ¿también incluye a los documentos anteriores o estamos hablando solamente de ahora en adelante?
When you say that we would need to translate all the documents for meetings and appeal meetings, would that include also all the previous documents that we already have, or just moving forward the documents?
It would include the previous documents and moving forward all the documents going forward.
Incluiría todos los documentos del pasado y también los del futuro.
Entonces, cuando estaba hablando de los $60,000 que se utilizarían para esos documentos, es un gasto de una sola ocasión.
So when it talks about the $70,000 required for that expense, it's a one-time cost. It's a one-time expense.
Yeah, $60,000, and that's a one-time cost. There is ongoing translation costs that are built into the budget. I believe at $35,000 approximately. But the $60,000 represents catching up.
Cuando están diciendo que van a contratar otra personal, ¿estamos hablando de la misma personal que habían puesto en el presupuesto que nos presentaron en la reunión anterior, o esta es otra persona adicional?
When you mention hiring an additional interpreter provider, are you talking about the same one that was mentioned at the last meeting, the May 17th, or is this another additional one, making a total of two?
To be clear, it's not an additional interpreter. This would be an additional office
No.
staff person, office assistant. It is in addition to the proposed addition of an office assistant for front desk support. So there would be two office assistants that would be included in the budget. One for front desk support, and the other to support the board and translation and interpretation.
Entonces estamos hablando de que en el budget se está aumentando a dos personas, con la que habían hablado del presupuesto anterior y esta nueva persona.
So when we're talking about the budget, we're talking about adding two people, the one that was mentioned at the last board meeting and the one that the new one that we're adding on today?
Correct.
Ok.
Sí, es correcto.
Otra cuestión. Cuando estamos hablando de que las reuniones especiales se llaman dentro de las 24 horas, ¿me pueden explicar el proceso para llamar a las reuniones especiales?
When you're talking about the requirements for all the documents to be submitted for translation purposes, ¿Y qué más dijo, señora?
Que si me pueden explicar el proceso para llamar a las reuniones especiales.
Could you explain to me the process for calling special meetings with these new requirements of submitting documents early for the translation services?
Porque yo me imagino que las reuniones especiales son planeadas más que solo con 24 horas. Porque están diciendo que esto les pondría mucho estrés. Entonces quiero que de todas maneras, anteriormente lo hacían con más tiempo que solo 24 horas.
Because I imagine special meetings are planned with more than 24 hours notice, so I want to know about that, because I would like that to continue.
So regular board meetings require 72 hours notice. Special board meetings require at least, and both require at least. But in this particular case, special meetings require at least 24 hours notice. Now, it can be more, and oftentimes when we have a special meeting like tonight, it was more than 24 hours notice. But a special meeting allows the board, for example, in emergency situations, to hold a meeting within 24 hours. Now, I think maybe only one time since we've been in existence have we had to hold a meeting within 24 hours notice. Usually, at minimum, it's 48 hours or longer for a special meeting. Special meetings are held when we need to conduct business that has to be conducted before the next regular board meeting.
Okay, I got some clarification
Sure.
from, so she wants to know if the meetings are planned more than 24 hours in advance, why does it sound like it's a huge stress to do the translation since, you know, staff preps for these meetings more than 24 hours in advance?
So if we go to, I think it was slide, do you remember the slide? I think it was. The slide that talks about the 72-hour requirement.
Slide 8. It's on the screen.
What number page is that? Okay, thank you. Okay, so in this slide, you can see that regular board meetings require at least 72 hours notice. So obviously, we can give more notice than 72 hours, but at minimum, it has to be 72 hours for a regular board meeting. So when we hold a board meeting, essentially, we have 2 to 3 weeks to put together all of the agenda items for the next board meeting. We need that time to actually complete all of the work, whether it's a budget, whether it's a complicated regulation, whether it's a new policy that the board wants to promote. We need at least several weeks to be able to actually put the work together. So if we have translation and there's a 2-week turnaround time on average to translate the documents, that would mean that within a week of a regular board meeting, we would have to have everything ready to go, to send out to the translator. Now, and have the translation ready in time for us to post it within the 72 hours. The issue is that we would not have enough time to put together the completed agenda packet within 1 week. It would take several weeks, usually 3 weeks, almost 3 weeks, to put together a completed agenda packet, which oftentimes includes hundreds of documents, complicated research. It often requires a lot of writing. When general counsel does his appeal recommendations, they're very lengthy and they require time to put together. And so the point is that 1 week's time is not adequate. We wouldn't be able to produce the agenda packet in time to have them translated, in time to post them within the 72 hours notice.
Bueno,
Can I provide some more information? The translation service typically requires at least 8 to 10 days leeway. So when we finish our packet in English, we'll provide them the final packet. And if we don't meet that 8 to 10 day leeway, then it's a rush job. And at that point, they'll double the price of the invoice. So the translation service actually requires additional time for us to give them a final packet to start the process.
puedo. ¿Cómo le hicieron esta ocasión? ¿Qué hicieron? Porque la agenda la recibí con 72 horas en español. Lo hicieron muy bien, gracias.
How did you do it this time? How did you do it? Because this time I received the packet within with the 72 hours notice. How did you do it this time? And I thank you for being able to provide me the packet within the 72 hours.
This time, the board packet was published in English and provided to board members, for you as well, in Spanish. And that was done in a non-certified manner. In other words, we used our own internal bilingual staff, online translators, to put it all together. When it comes to written documents, rent board written documents, they have to be done by a certified translator, not by non-certified translators. So we were able to do it for this board meeting, for you and for the other board members, provide the Spanish translation, but it wasn't a certified one. And that's why. A certified translation would require 8 to 10 days, generally.
Cuando están poniendo en la última parte que dicen que ustedes piensan que deberíamos de elegir la opción B,
When you put the second part, the last part where it says you recommend that we go with option B,
¿por qué lo haríamos si con la opción A de todas maneras estaríamos reduciendo los costos que se le cobran a los inquilinos?
why would we do it if with option A we would still be reducing the rent fees to I believe it's renters.
Aquí, según lo que se pone,
Here, what it says here,
el año pasado se cobró 226 a una unidad completa
last year it was charged $226 for a fully covered unit,
y este año, si nosotros usamos la opción A, estaremos cobrando 221. Aún así, le estaríamos reduciendo $5.
and this year if we would go with option A, we would still be charging $221, so we would only be saving $5.
Y lo mismo es para las unidades parciales. También
And
de
the
todas
same-
maneras estaré reduciendo los costos.
The same goes for partially covered units.
¿Por qué voy a optar por una opción B si la opción A de todas maneras ustedes tendrían el dinero para poder cubrir todo lo que necesitamos?
Why would I go for option B where option A still provides everything we need?
Además,
Additionally,
¿qué hicieron cuando estuvieron en el COVID que es tan difícil poder implementar las reuniones híbridas?
what did we do when COVID was on the rise that's so hard for us to do now?
Fue tan
What are these
difícil en
measures to do it now?
¿Fue tan difícil en la época de COVID o fue muchísimo cargo adicional económico para hacer esas reuniones?
Was it so hard during the COVID pandemic, or was there more support for those services, hybrid services, amid the pandemic?
We didn't have hybrid services. We had full online board meetings during the pandemic. It was not in person. In terms of the fees, the reason the fees have gone down is because the board has a reserve policy that sets the reserve between 18 and 25%, a minimum of 18%, a maximum of 25%. Once the rent program has collected 25% reserves, we can no longer add a reserve item. We can no longer charge for reserves until we go back down below the 25% threshold. It's important for the board to know also that the fees in front of you right now, next year will likely, the amounts you see in front of you will be higher because we will likely have to add a reserve back to the budget so that we can get back to a reserve minimum of 18% and a maximum of 25%. So it's going to add more money to the budget in next year.
If I can just add, just on the reserve issue, yes, agree with what the executive director had to say. I just want to let you all know that the reserve policy is going to come before you at the next meeting, so you can have a more depth conversation as it relates to that, related to the potential increase of fees in the next, not this coming fiscal year, but the fiscal year after that. It all depends. We don't know. If we do a good job at collecting, the fees may stay the same or be reduced. And then finally, I just want to make one point. I'm the attorney. I usually don't speak on these kind of things, and I generally will not. But because you are all new, I think it's appropriate in this instance. I think it's really important to understand that a fee reduction is not a bad thing, that the board obviously represents both tenants and landlords. And there's landlords who consistently come here and say the fees are too high. And so one thing that you may want to consider as sitting board members is that the fee may be too high. So a reduction in fee would reflect something that the landlords have been speaking about. And also, a reduction in fee is not a reduction in services. We still provide the same level of services in the current fiscal year. Finally, if we reduce the fee, we don't save money. Landlords do. And I think it's important to know that the budget represents expenditures. The fee is how you pay for it, and you can charge any amount you want. But if you cannot collect it because landlords are unhappy, you will run a deficit, and that has tremendous legal implications and practical implications as well.
Can I also add that if the board adopts option A, which would result in monthly board meetings, it wouldn't be feasible. It would be very difficult to conduct our work as normal. As previously mentioned, there would be an impact on staff trying to meet frankly an unrealistic deadline. There may be one possible option for the future, is that the board could request that the contract for translation services go back for a request for proposals, which is basically allowing vendors to compete with each other to provide the best price and the best service. And we may be able to negotiate a better arrangement in the future. But as it currently stands, and as is the industry standard, it takes at least, on average, about 2 weeks to translate the documents that we would need to translate. So holding normal board meetings monthly and doing full translation and interpretation would not be feasible.
Tengo más preguntas.
I have no more questions.
Leí su paquete que mandaron. Por cierto, si solo recibí en inglés.
I read the packets that you guys gave me.
Y aquí están diciendo que exactamente ustedes ya van a poder abrir a poder compararlas con de tener opciones, o sea, buscar otras compañías y buscar precios. Ya
And here you're
¿Ustedes
saying,
han comenzado a hacer esto?
and here you're saying you'd be able to open it up and offer it to other translation interpretation services so they can compete for your business and offer a better estimates. Have you guys begun doing that?
That has not begun. That would need
Eso
to
no se ha
be,
empezado.
the board would have to
Comité
approve
tendría
us
que
moving
aprobar-
forward with that at some
Probar
point in the
eso
future.
para que en un punto en el futuro para que se haga.
And there's no guarantee that
No
we
hay
would find a
garantiza
better price or a better
encontremos
service.
un servicio mejor,
Ok.
un precio mejor.
En la parte que dijimos que queríamos tener mejor alcance a la comunidad, ¿cuánto tiempo estiman que ustedes nos pueden decir cuál sería el costo y qué es lo que ustedes harían para tener mejor alcance a la comunidad?
Going to the part where you said we want to improve community outreach, how much would that cost, and what would be the turnaround time to get to those so we can start the community outreach?
I'm sorry, the board directed us to come back with
Discúlpeme,
creative
pero
outreach
el
proposals.
comité
And
nos pidió que
what I
empezáramos
mentioned
con
in the
propuestas
agenda
para
report is that we already have a
actividades
comprehensive
creativas.
outreach
Y
plan
como yo
that's
mencioné
well-funded.
en el
We think it would be appropriate for the
programa, ya
board
tenemos
to review
un
that outreach
programa
plan
de
at some point in
alcance
the
de la
future
comunidad.
and add
Creo que sería
suggestions for
bueno
the
que el
future.
comité revise ese
We
programa
can
para que lo usemos en el
utilize
futuro.
our allocated budget
Vamos a
for
usar nuestro
outreach,
presupuesto
which
para
includes mostly
el alcance de la
the
comunidad,
budget
que
for
incluye
staff.
Principalmente
You know,
el presupuesto
per
para los, el equipo,
our recommendation and the board's
con nuestra
direction,
recomendación y la
or
recomendación
the
del
board's
comité.
direction based on our
La
recommendation.
dirección del comité basado en nuestras recomendaciones.
Okay. ¿Cuándo podríamos ver esas recomendaciones o su paquete que tienen para tener ese alcance a la comunidad?
So when could we see your recommendation or the packet you have for community outreach?
So that would happen after
Eso
we adopt the
ocurriría
budget.
después que
As I mentioned in
adoptemos
the
el
budget
presupuesto.
presentation,
Como dije en la
we feel
presentación del
that
presupuesto, nosotros
our
sentimos
budget for
que nuestro
outreach and
presupuesto
education
para
is adequate
alcance
to
de
fulfill,
comunidad y educación es suficiente para requerir,
our charge,
para
our
alcanzar nuestro cobro,
responsibility.
nuestras responsabilidades.
However, the board, if the
Pero
board wants
el
to
comité, si el
increase
comité quiere
the budget for outreach, that's
subir,
their
incrementar
prerogative.
el
But at this point,
presupuesto para el alcance de
we
comunidad
we
es
continue to and
es
have
su-
done a lot of
su
outreach,
situación, y para ese punto
whether
ya
it's
hemos
monthly
tenido
workshops,
mucho alcance de la comunidad.
infographic videos,
Como si ha sido
fact
por-
sheets,
por
FAQs, or frequently asked
mensuales
questions,
o
podcasts, social media posts,
a publicaciones en redes
and
sociales o
as well as going to community
avisos
events,
a la
tabling at
comunidad,
community events,
o
meeting with
haciendo
community
eventos con la
leaders and
comunidad,
stakeholders,
teniendo juntas con
all of those
líderes
things,
de
some
la
of those
comunidad,
things
todas
which
esas
have been
cosas.
impacted by the pandemic,
Una de
which
esas cosas sí
we're
fueron
now
impactados por
we're
la
freed up to be
pandemia,
able
pero ahora ya
to,
podemos
to go
otra
back
vez
and
regresar a hacer
engage in.
esas cosas.
Do you have any more questions, Chair Espinoza?
¿Tiene
No,
más
Sorry,
preguntas?
Board Member Espinoza.
Miembro Espinosa?
No por ahora.
Not right now.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members?
¿Alguna otra pregunta del comité?
Okay, I have some questions. So the first is following on Board Member Espinoza's question about the catch-up translation, the translation of past documents. So I heard you say that that would be a one-time cost to translate documents from the past, but then when I'm looking at the budget, specifically slide 11, where you show the two options, you show the translation cost as being exactly half, when I believe that actually just the ongoing cost should be halved, not the entire cost. So it would actually, be more like 75 to 80,000 rather than 47,500. It should be, I believe 77,500.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so we're presenting this as this particular budget, but you are correct. It is only a one-time amount for catching up, and then it includes going forward this fiscal year or this upcoming fiscal year. But some of that will drop off The exact amount I don't have right in front of me, but it will drop off after this upcoming fiscal year, and when we complete all of our translations.
Yeah, I understand that. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm saying that the translation cost for option B that's listed is incorrect. It should be
Okay.
77,500
Can you go to that slide?
instead of 47,500. If it is in fact the case that that 60,000 is a one-time cost for translating everything in the past, because if we only do board meetings every other month, we don't have fewer past documents to translate. The past is fixed, correct? So we would still have that $60,000 cost regardless, and then it just would be the additional 35,000 that would be cut in half if we were doing the option B. Is that correct?
You want to speak to this?
Can I, for staff, just clarify for the public and for the board, what your 95,000, your 47,500, what does that comprise of? And why, if it has a 60,000 included, why is it only in A and not in B? Because aren't you going to have to translate all your documents anyways, no matter what avenue you take?
Correct. So the translation amount, it actually does have past documentation as well. There is some board documentation as well. So I apologize for that confusion. So there are, say for instance, if there's an appeal or other petition related events, we would have to do translations for that. So it's not just pure 100% going back to. We did estimate 30,000 for past, but then we do have some built in for future for other petitions and appeals moving forward.
But the number of meetings that we have doesn't change the number of appeals, correct? We just would be hearing those appeals at the same number of appeals at fewer meetings.
Correct. But then not all appeals actually come to the board meetings. If, say for instance, there could be submitted documentation to the board clerk that needs to be translated, it may or may not come to appeal, or it may come to appeal and get dismissed, but we buffer some for that request when the petitioner or respondent actually requests for that service.
Okay, so it sounds like what I'm hearing is that 60,000 number is not the cost to translate the entire historic backlog of the rent board.
Correct.
It's the cost to translate historic documents that relate to appeals that are coming to the board.
There's actually a blend of both past and potentially future. So I could provide a spreadsheet as to how I calculated it.
I'm just, I guess the point that I'm trying to make is that it looks like the main kind of advantage of option B is about staff work experience, working conditions, the ability of staff to conduct their work. The financial savings are not extremely significant, especially because I'm still not understanding why the amount of appeal documents would be less if we're having fewer meetings, because wouldn't the appeals just get shifted to the next, just get shifted to the next meeting?
They can be, but appeals are subjected to the petitioner respondent. They may not actually come to the board. They should, but they may not. They can be dismissed.
So you're predicting then that if we have bi-monthly meetings instead of monthly meetings, that fewer appeals will come through to the board because people will withdraw their appeals?
No. I can't speak upon that. It's subjective to the petitioner. It's but the spreadsheet that I created, the 60,000, there are historical documents. And that's an estimate as well. But then we still did calculate for half of the future meetings and potential appeals that may come through. So it does have a blend, and I can provide you the spreadsheet that does that calculation.
Okay, I think I'm fine. I'm not quite understanding, but I'm willing to drop it. My Next question is about the cost to have 2 interpreters at the meeting versus 1. So what was presented to us is the cost of 1 versus 2 interpreters, assuming that we have monthly meetings. If we move to bi-monthly meetings as recommended in option B, what would the cost be for 2 interpreters at each meeting?
It would increase by that 4,200.
So it would be the 8,400.
Correct, total. And estimated fees more likely would increase by $1 for the fully covered and $1 for partially covered.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question right now is just about the hybrid needs for technology, and would we need to purchase things like cameras, or are we able to use some of KCRT's equipment?
We have the budgeted $5,000 for laptops, and those laptops should have both the cameras and video for all the board members, and then we would have to work with KCRT to figure out how to set up the public side of it for somebody to log in and be able to hear the interpretation in sequence with the board meeting being conducted at the same time. That we still have to work out.
So I'm wondering specifically about the ability of the public to see the entire meeting as a whole. It sounds like you're saying that they would be seeing each of us individually rather than seeing the entire meeting?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless KCRT can administer the TV side, which they told us they don't have the bandwidth for.
And Chair, just to mention, I have to look into this issue just in terms of the legal side. If KCRT is not willing to provide support, and they kind of have plenary power over the IT of the city, whether or not we can engage, I suppose, their infrastructure in that kind of way. I would assume we would need some kind of assent by them to do that, but I'm gonna have to speak with the city attorney on that particular issue of the hybrid.
So yeah, that just might be something to look into, would be having some of those funds be diverted to having a camera so that the public can see the entire meeting, sort of similar to how city council works.
Yeah, and just so you know, the IT department does have those cameras, so it may be possible to use them if they're available. But we can include in the budget, per the direction of the board, possibly including those additional costs.
I just want to make really clear that the legal issues, I would probably recommend you hold off on a hybrid thing. Maybe you can discuss it at your next meeting. I need to talk to the city attorney and IT related to that. If they're not willing to provide us their infrastructure, I'm uncertain whether or not we can do that alone.
Okay,
I mean, they own everything, right? It's all theirs. And so I need to know what's the limits that we are an independent body, but our independence only goes so far. And I need to know from IT and the city attorney's office whether or not we could use their infrastructure absent their permission or absent their service, because it is their service and it's kind of reflective of what they do. So I would have to look into that.
Are you saying that if they're not able to provide us with the equipment, there's a question about whether we would legally be able to offer hybrid meetings at all?
Well, you have to use the city's infrastructure in order to have a hybrid meeting, right? It's not only just like cameras. You could buy your own cameras hypothetically, but you still need to plug that camera into something, and it needs to go into the infrastructure of the city. And if the city is saying, we're not going to provide you the bandwidth, sometimes that's a city way of saying, we don't want you to do something. Sometimes that's a city way of saying, we just don't have the bandwidth. We can't help you with what you want to do. I need to know what it is. This is kind of the first time I heard of this particular issue, so I haven't been able to contact the city. So I'd like to speak to the city attorney and the IT and see where they're falling on this issue.
When you say that we would need to still plug into city infrastructure, are you referring to things like city Wi-Fi or what? Like, I'm not understanding.
So if the city is taking it, I don't know any of this. This is just hypothetical, right? But if the city is taking a stance that we just don't want certain boards to have hybrid, or we don't want certain boards to broadcast from our chambers, the city has plenary power because it's their chambers. They own the infrastructure. Everything we do is within the cities. We're not independent in that way. We rent space, et cetera, right? So infrastructure is, sure, it could be IT, but it's literally the seat you're sitting in. It's the projection of the city symbol to the public, et cetera. We need city permission to do. Even to sit in this chamber, we need city permission, right? We couldn't just sit in this chamber without their permission. So if we're projecting our images to the public, and if that's something they don't want us to do, then, we're going to there's an issue there. But I need to be able to explore that issue.
Okay, great. So it sounds like you're recommending then that we don't ask to allocate any additional funds towards hybrid infrastructure until we know more about whether the city will allow us to broadcast from the room.
Right, and if they will allow us, it's just a phone call, and hopefully they answer relatively quickly, and I can get the answer by tomorrow, because I'll call them tomorrow. It could be proposed when we do the final budget. That could be a part of the proposal of the final budget. But I don't think right now, because it's so uncertain, that you guys should even really dive into that.
Great. Okay, thank you. All right. Any additional questions from board members? Okay, seeing no further questions, Madam Clerk, please call the public speakers.
As mentioned before, we have 2 public speakers. The speakers shall be allowed 2 minutes to address the board. The first speaker is Ms. Alana Clark.
So I just want to say that what Nick and Mr. Tran were talking about earlier didn't make any sense to me either. You certainly don't have to approve stuff that you don't understand. This is not rocket science. They should be able to explain in their numbers what they mean and what they're doing. Speaking of numbers, one of the first budget line items, $814,000 for the executive branch salaries and compensation packages, amounts to 2 people, Mr. Traylor and Mr. Tran. That's your executive branch. So, that's a little bit of a chunk, in my opinion. And all through the pandemic, Nick had no problem letting himself out raises. I'm not going to say anything more about that. Mr. Tran and I had an interesting discussion. This is, by the way, Measure L, what the city of Richmond voted for. All the numbers have been changed and lots of regulations have been added, and I don't even know if you can tell the difference between what Richmond voted for and what the board has done, but what the board has done can be changed by the board. This is what Measure L says. Financing. The board shall finance its reasonable and necessary expenses by charging landlords annual registration fees in amounts deemed reasonable by the board. The board is also empowered, Mr. Tran, to request and receive funding when and if necessary from any available source for its reasonable and necessary expenses. Now, the board has discussed passing on part of the cost of this very expensive program in part to the renters of Richmond many times. Our fees are some of the most expensive.
Your time has expired. Thank you.
And
your time has expired. I need you to walk away from the stand now,
also
please.
pass on part
Is there a way to
of
turn her
their
microphone off?
fees. Please consider it. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Chris, I hope I say the last name right. Is it Schultz?
You got it.
Okay, Chris Schultz.
Thank you so much, and good evening. My name is Chris Schultz. I'm Director of Housing Justice at Urban Habitat. We support community leaders from the most impacted communities to serve on public boards and commissions. And we're proud to have Board Member Espinosa as one of our BCLI members. We're so impressed with the work that the board and staff have done to come up with options to expand language access. Richmond's population is 43% Latino today, and 10% of Richmond residents, 1 in 10, are monolingual Spanish speakers. So expanding language access is really language justice for the whole city. We have a letter that we've distributed. I ask you to consider it. And to the conversation tonight, to offer that we support option A, to budget for monthly meetings, and you all can consider later whether you want to reduce the number of meetings, but to give yourself the budget so you have the option, which is what you're discussing tonight. But whichever option you choose, the most important thing is to maintain full translation and interpretation, as staff has suggested tonight, so we commend that. I also want to suggest, as someone who's been a commissioner in the city of Berkeley, that oftentimes the staff can start working on the next month's meeting as soon as their first packet has gone in for translation. So you don't actually have to try to put together a packet in 1 week. You still have the full month, you just need to plan further ahead. So there might be options to maintain monthly meetings while still having a sustainable workload for staff. So thank you so much for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you. That was the last speaker.
Great, thank you. Thank you to our speakers and to staff. Are there any further questions from board members? I'd like to ask, can you clarify the number of staff that are covered by the executive budget?
Executive staff include myself, Fred Tran, general counsel, hearing examiner, staff attorney, and that's it.
Okay, so is that
So-
6? No, 5.
Right. So if it were just Fred and I guess we'd be making a lot of money, a lot more than the President of the United States. So
Great, okay, thank you for that additional clarity. Let's see, should we, I guess, maybe discuss before we have a motion, or did you have a question? Okay.
Chair, if I can make-
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, no worries. You can call for a vote because you're finished with your discussion, it sounds like. But before you do, I just want to put on the record that any translation service provided to any board member doesn't favor or disfavor any particular native speaker or nationality. I think it would be problematic if this were a Spanish-speaking kind of favored translation service. It's for any board member who speaks any native language, who's monolingual. So.
Great, so if we had a new board member join who spoke a third language, then we would use those interpretation services.
If they were monolingual, and again, the
Yes.
city doesn't have any policy like this, so we're not. I don't think we're the first to do anything because we have no policy. What we're doing is providing a board member with the ability to participate in an effective manner.
Great. Board Member Height, do you have a question? What do you?
Well, I want to address Ms. Petrie's issue with
So I think because we're not voting on that tonight, that maybe that is something that we should discuss at a future meeting. What do you think, General Counsel?
yeah.
The question is, Board Member Height would like to respond to a public comment about the definition of mom and pop landlords.
Yeah, it's not before us. We typically also don't respond to public comments, but we can, I think at your next meeting, was that in your presentation? Was that in your presentation? the mom and pop, or was that just a public?
Not today's presentation. It was in a previous
Okay,
presentation.
yeah, no, then it would be outside the agenda. Just for your edification, though, that issue will come up in the future before any action is taken into entering into a contract. So, yeah. So you will have an opportunity to weigh in, and so will the public, before any action is taken on that issue.
Great. So it sounds like there will be a space for it at a future meeting. Does that work for you? Okay.
I don't have a question. I do have a couple of hesitations, I guess. I completely understand why staff recommended for us to vote for option B. And I'm also would kind of refer to Board Member Espinosa as, you know, I feel like I take being bilingual for granted, and I would love to kind of look to Board Member Espinosa for a little more guidance as to what would be more helpful for her.
Yeah, thank you. I second, I'd like to hear from Board Member Espinosa what your thoughts are about certified translation versus doing the in-house translation, and also 1 versus 2 interpreters, and of course anything else you'd like to share, if you're willing to share with us.
Lo primero que me gustaría es, ¿puedo con un intérprete?
The first thing I like to say about with only one interpreter,
Pero me encantaría que abrieran su... Permítanme un momento. Ay, ¿dónde está? Espera. Que abrieran otras compañías para saber cuánto es realmente, dicen cuál compañía nos puede convenir más y que sea una persona certificada.
I would like for you guys to open it up to the companies so we can know what the other companies are kind of offering, so we can see, so we could have a certified interpreter with us.
So to be clear, interpretation doesn't require certification. It's translation of the written documents that requires certification. Does that make sense? So the written documents have to be certified. The interpretation does not have to be certified.
Oh, disculpe. Tenía esa equivocación porque cuando nos reuní con usted, dijo que la traducción a fuerza tenía que ser certificada.
Oh, that's where I had the confusion, because when I had the meeting with you, you had told me that the translation had to be certified.
The translation does have to be certified. There's a difference. So translate. When I speak of translation, I'm speaking of written documents. But interpretation is the oral interpretation of the meetings, like we're doing right now.
Okay. De todas maneras, tal vez podemos buscar a un intérprete que sea de nuestro condado. No tengo ningún problema con el señor Josué, pero tal vez podemos buscar a alguien que sea de aquí.
But I think we could also look for an interpreter who is from our county. I have no problems with Mr. Josue, but it would be nice to have an interpreter who is from this area.
Sobre los documentos,
About the documents,
agradezco que me los hayan dado hoy en español.
I appreciate that they were given to me today in Spanish.
Eso me ayuda mucho.
It helps a lot.
Y creo que yo no tengo ningún problema con las reuniones que sean cada mes. Para mí la opción A es la mejor.
And I don't think I have any problem with the meetings being a monthly thing. I think option A is better.
Como ustedes tienen estrés para poner las reuniones, yo también me pongo a leer los documentos aunque me los envíen en inglés.
Even though you guys are stressed to prepare these meetings, I also go through and read these documents even though they're given to me in English.
Así que no sé exactamente qué quieran. Yo con la traducción estoy perfecto.
So I don't know what you guys want from me about the translations in respect to that.
Pero lo que más busco es que tengamos alcance a la mayor comunidad.
But what I seek the most is that we have the outreach to the majority of the community.
Porque el único hecho por el que vine y me puse en este lugar
Because the only reason why I came and accepted this position
es para que las personas que están en mi mismo lugar tengan más conocimiento sobre esto.
so the people who are also in my position could have more knowledge about these things.
Yo soy una persona que renta durante más de 20 años aquí en Richmond y sé las desventajas de no poder entender qué es lo que se están diciendo.
I have been renting in Richmond for more than 20 years, and I know about the disadvantages that come with renting in a place where you do not understand what you're being told.
Así que por eso pido que se dé más alcance a la comunidad, se dé traducción y de eso se beneficia no solamente yo, sino todos los demás.
So that's why I seek a community outreach so they can have the translations. That's what will benefit everyone else, like just as it has benefited me. That's what I seek.
¿Tiene otra pregunta para mí?
Do you have a question for me?
Yeah, so
Sí, entonces.
they presented two options. One was having kind of an official certified translation of all of the materials for every meeting. The other option was having that certified translation just for the shorter agenda packet and doing the staff translation for the remainder of the documents. For you, is there a big difference between the two? Do you strongly prefer one over the other?
No tengo ningún problema con ninguno de los dos. Lo puedo entender,
I have no problem with either of the two. I can understand them.
pero sigo con el hecho de que la opción A es la que nos conviene y se supone que ahí ya está la traducción certificada.
But I maintain that option A is the one that benefits us the most, and that's the one that has that one holds certified translation.
Porque de todas maneras estamos reduciendo los costos para las personas que pagan estos. Bueno, que estamos reduciendo $5 en una y no sé cuánto en la siguiente.
Because either way, we're reducing the cost for the people who pay for those fees, and I don't know $5 for this option, and I don't know how much for the other option.
Entonces, por esa razón pienso que la opción A es la que nos conviene. De todas maneras estamos reduciendo costos.
That's why I believe option A. Perdón, disculpe. That's why I believe option A is the one that benefits us because we are seeing a reduction in those fees.
Si estamos teniendo reduciendo costos, ¿por qué vamos a buscar una opción B que no tendríamos tantos servicios y todavía estamos reduciendo mucho más costos? Bueno, reduciéndoles más el dinero que estaríamos cobrando.
If we're already reducing costs with option A, why would we go for option B where we're going to have less services and we will still not see significant savings passed on towards those fees?
So my understanding is that both option A and option B include the certified translation.
Y opción B, los dos incluyen
That there
traducciones
was an
certificadas.
additional option that wasn't option A versus option B, but
hubo
just in
una
talking
opción
about the written
adicional.
translation, that there was the ability to potentially have some documents be translated faster and reduce the impact on staff, to have that translation be done quickly by staff rather than being sent out to a certified translator and taking 2 weeks. And so my question is that sufficient? Is that level of translation sufficient?
You're going to have to give me a moment to interpret everything you just said, ma'am.
Yeah, sorry.
Chair Cantor. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is it Mike? Mi pregunta era que. Oh, it's already been so long that I forgot. I'm so sorry.
Do you want me to repeat?
Yes, please.
Okay, so my understanding is that
Como yo
option
lo
A
entiendo, es la
and option
opción A y
B
la opción B.
both
Los
include
dos
certified
incluyen
translation only.
traducciones certificados.
And they gave us the option
dieron una
to
opción
potentially have some of the documents
De tener
translated by staff
que tengamos
that
uno
would
de los
make it
documentos
be
traducidos
faster
por uno de nuestros
to,
empleados
say if they
para
wanted
que sea más rápido,
to add a document
por si ellos quisieran
to give to us
agregar
at
un
the last
documento,
minute, that they could translate it
que ellos mismos lo
themselves
podrían
instead
traducir
of sending it
en
out
vez de
to
mandarlo
a certified
a
translator.
un traductor
And so my
certificado.
question
Mi
is
pregunta es,
is that type of translation
¿ese tipo de traducción
sufficient,
es
or do we
suficiente
need
para
to make
usted?
sure that all of the documents are translated by a certified translator? All the documents that you would be
usted quiere
receiving,
asegurarse que todos los documentos
such
que usted
as
reciba sean
the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
traducidos por unos
Chair
certificados.
Cantor, can I clarify a little bit? So there's
Señora
three
Cantor,
options.
¿puede explicar un poco? Hay tres
Option A
opciones.
and option B include full translation, certified translation of all documents,
De todos los documentos
past and present.
del pasado,
It also
presente.
includes full interpretation. The only difference between option A and option B is that we hold 7 meetings instead of 14. We budget for 7 instead of 14. That's the only difference. And then there is the alternative option. The alternative option would be that we translate the packet just for board member Espinoza and any other board member that wishes to have it translated. It would not, we would not have, that would not go out to the public though. That particular option, it would, the board member would be able to review the packet in Spanish, but it would be published on the website, it would be published publicly in English. So that's the difference. Option A and option B both allow the complete agenda packet to be translated as a certified translation that would go both to board member Espinoza and the board as well as the public. So that's the difference between option A and B and the alternative option. The alternative option would give board members translation, but not the public. Is that clear? And again, option A budgets for 14 meetings. Option B budgets for 7 meetings. But both of them provide full translation and full interpretation. The only difference is the number of board meetings. And in terms of the fee, it's important to know that one of the reasons the fee is lower this year, or the main reason the fee is lower this year, is because we did not include in our budget a reserve item or a reserve budget item and budget line, which means that our overall budget is lower than it is last year because we're not including that extra reserve amount, which is usually around $600,000. The reason we're not including a reserve is because our current reserve policy says that once we have collected 25% of reserves, which we have done, we cannot continue to charge reserves until we need to again. And so that's why next year, when we go before the board, we present the budget, in all likelihood, unless our collection rate is super high, we'll have to replenish the reserves so that we can be in alignment with the reserve policy. And the reserve policy, okay, that's it. Does that make,
No tengo preguntas ahora. Ya. ¿Qué porcentaje es lo que cobraron el año pasado?
What's the percentage you charged last year?
I think it's 226
No, en porcentaje.
for reserve,
De porcent.
18%.
18%.
Okay, I'm sorry. I should have probably stopped the discussion around reserves a lot earlier. The agendized item doesn't mention reserves. No one, I don't think the public had an opportunity to understand that as mentioned in the agenda item that reserves would be discussed, unless I'm incorrect. The reserve will be discussed at the next meeting, so we should save our questions for the next meeting. this meeting
La cuestión de la
was not
reserva
properly
será
agendized.
ocurrido el próximo junta. En esta junta no es un artículo de la agenda
Ya,
sobre
es
la
que-
reserva.
Me encantaría saber esa información antes de poder seguir adelante.
Well, I would love to know that information before moving forward.
Unfortunately,
Desafortunadamente,
that discussion cannot happen because
discusión
you
no
would
se
be
puede- no
running
puede
up against the Brown Act.
ocurrir
You can
porque
only have
estaríamos
discussions,
trabajando contra
and I apologize,
el
Board Member
acto
Espinoza,
Brown,
because our
y le-
training
me
hasn't
disculpo
happened
con-
yet,
con
so I do
la
not fault
señora
you at
Brown
all.
Espinoza.
But you cannot have
no puede
discussions
tener una
on
discusión
matters that
sobre
were not
asuntos
properly
que no
agendized.
están-
And your
no
agenda
están
has
en
to,
la agenda.
language has to be broad enough to
y su lenguaje de la agenda
apprise
debe ser lo
the
suficiente
ordinary
amplio
reader
para-
of what is to be
para que
discussed at the
el-
meeting.
el
If I read our
cliente
agenda
ordinario puede
item,
entender que se
there's
está
no
hablando
way
en la junta.
the
Y
member
si
of the
no hay
public
un
would have
artículo
known
de la agenda,
that reserves would be
no hay una
discussed.
forma que
So,
la-
but
el
don't
público
worry,
sepa
we will
que
have
la
that
reserva
discussion
se va a
next
hablar, pero no se
meeting
preocupe.
because it has to be
Tendremos esa
agendized next
plática
meeting, so
en la
that will come
próxima
before you
junta,
for the next
porque
meeting.
se necesita
Ya.
practicar.
Solo le
Entonces,
pregunté
hará en la
porque
próxima
también es
junta.
parte del presupuesto. Entonces, yo
I
creo
only-
que deberíamos saber cuánto fue la reserva, cuánto fue lo que...
I only asked because I saw that it was mentioned in the packet. That's why I'm asking about the reserve budget.
Oh, what, was it mentioned? I could be wrong. Or in the packet.
¿Fue mencionado? Quizás esté equivocado. ¿Fue mencionado en la agenda?
No, pero la reserva es parte de todo el presupuesto en general.
No, it was not mentioned, but the reserve is part of the whole budget in general.
Yeah, I get that, but it has to be,
Entiendo eso, pero tiene que ser.
it's just not included. It wasn't properly agendized for
No,
this
no
discussion.
fue
to happen.
incluido en la
So,
agenda para,
I have a question.
para tocar ese tema.
I
Tengo una
heard,
pregunta. Entonces, yo oí
Mr. Trailer bring
al
up
señor
the
Trailer
discussion about
hablar sobre la
potential
discusión de
reserves for future years, and I understand we
de
cannot
la-
talk about that because that
la
would need to,
posibilidad
that's
de
going to
reserva
be
en el
coming to the
futuro.
board for a vote. We
Hay
can't
que
discuss
hablarlo de eso
any
porque
future decisions
algún día
about
se
the
tiene que
reserve.
hablar y yo sé que ahorita
May
no se
we
puede hablar sobre la
discuss
reserva.
past data about
Podemos discutir sobre
reserves, what
los
happened
datos del
last year
pasado, qué pasó
without
el año
talking
pasado,
about future
sin
years at
hablar
all?
de la
Because
reserva
I
del
haven't
futuro.
seen, for example, Board Member Espinoza didn't ask any questions about future years. That was Mr. Trailer who brought up the future years. So
La
can we
señora
talk just
Espinoza
about
no
the past
preguntó
about
sobre
reserves?
Right,
la reserva del
so
futuro.
you can
Vamos a
talk,
hablar sobre
you
la
can talk
reserva
about
del
anything
pasado.
that falls within the purview of the agendized item, and
Puede hablar
could
de
someone bring up
cualquier
the,
cosa que está
what's
en
the
la
agenda?
agenda. Alguien, por favor, pónganla
The
en
agenda
la pantalla.
is,
It talks about the objective of the operating budget options.
Right.
Corresponding rental housing fees. So
Right.
can we talk
And-
about,
and that's what the public had. And,
Eso es lo que
you know,
el
based
público
on
tiene.
that, I don't think the
Basado en
public would have
eso,
known that
No
an
creo que el
agenda
público
policy would be
sabría
discussed.
que la agenda
Give me a sec, let me see
que se
something.
iba a tomar, se iba a
so
tocar
if we're
la
not
policía de
talking about
reserva.
the
Entonces, no
policy,
estamos
we're just
hablando de
talking
la
about past
policía.
activity, about
Estamos hablando
historic,
de-
we're talking about
de
historical
actividad
data
del
about the
pasado,
budget,
cosas
not about
históricamente del
any
presupuesto,
future policy,
no de
just
un-
talking about historical data about
policías del futuro.
what was put towards reserves. Is that okay? Because that seems like it would
Entonces,
fall within
sería
the
algo que
purview
estamos hablando,
of general budget discussion.
sería parte del análisis del presupuesto pasado. ¿Sería aceptable eso?
So I'm really conservative when it comes to the Brown Act. And
Soy muy
I
conservativo
yeah, and
cuando
I heard someone say,
estoy
yeah, yeah.
hablando de-
And
del acto.
you know, my advice as an attorney is
Mi
not to,
consejo sobre
just
como
because
abogado es
the
que no lo
public
hagan
needs to be
simplemente
aware
porque
of
el
what's
público debe
what's
ser
going to be discussed.
consciente de qué se va
And
a
I
hablar.
am unsure whether or not the language is broad enough to cover past activities, and some members of the public, landlords and tenants, may have attended this meeting had they known that past discussions around reserves would happen.
Yo siento que
That
si uno
is just on staff
dueños y
to make sure that their
reguladores de
agenda language is
apartamentos
broad enough to
supieran que se iba a
encompass
hablar sobre,
those kind of discussions.
sobre el cobro de
So
reserva.
my advice would be not to. I don't know if it's
Quizás hubieran
critical to
atendido.
this particular
Ese es
discussion.
mi
I'm
consejo,
not sure.
sería no tocar esos
But you can
temas,
have the conversation with staff after the meeting
pero puede hablar con
on an individual
el
basis.
equipo después de la junta.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like
Gracias.
Right now,
Se oye como
we're
que
just
ahorita
talking about this
todos
year, we're
estamos
not
hablando
talking
de
about the
este año,
potential,
estamos
what could
hablando
happen
de-
in future years.
de
And
lo que
so,
posiblemente pase en
I
el
just would
futuro.
ask that everybody
Yo
restrict their
quiero-
comments to
Yo
this
quiero pedir
year
que
and
todos
not
hablen,
speculating about
que
future
se
years
limiten
and
sus
what could
comentarios
happen
sobre este año y
in
no
future
de lo que
years.
puede
But I
pasar en
think
el
that
futuro.
that keeps us safe, right?
Creo que eso nos va a mantener seguros.
Do you have more questions?
¿Tiene otras
Board Member
preguntas,
Espinoza?
señora Espinosa?
Board Member Height?
Miembro Hay.
I think we should do option B, and I'll tell you why. If we do option A, it's going to put a strain on the staff, and we're going to lose energy towards outreach.
Yo creo que debemos de seleccionar la opción
I
B.
think
porque si
outreach is a real big
ponemos
big issue for
solución
us
A,
all.
opción A, vamos a
And if we do A,
cansarnos y vamos a hacer menos para el alcance de la comunidad.
It'll just cause, it'll cause too much strain. Plus,
Si hacemos
I think
solución
we can
A,
get
causaría
everything done in
mucho
6 to 7 meetings,
trabajo.
and we can spend
creo que
our own
todo-
time talking to the community, you
Yo
know.
creo que podemos cubrir todos los asuntos en 6 o
So
7
I
juntas.
would
Y podemos tomar
recommend
más
option
tiempo
B.
hablando con la comunidad. Por eso yo recomiendo la opción B.
Quick question. If
Yeah,
we
Board
Una
Member
pregunta
Bartlett?
rápida.
do option B,
Si hacemos opción
are we
B,
expected to have longer meetings since we're condensing them?
vamos a, se va a esperar que
And we're still
tengamos juntas
allocating the
más
same amount
largas.
of time for the public and landlords and
Porque
everybody to
vamos a
be
dar tiempo para
aware.
el público,
Can
para
you,
los dueños, para los
Just give me a
inquilinos.
little more
¿Me puede dar un
detail?
poco de información sobre eso?
So we don't
Sí,
anticipate
no
having to
anticipamos
go
que
to 4-hour, 5-hour meetings or
tengamos
anything like
este
that.
juntas de 4 o 5
We have a
horas.
regulation that
Tenemos una
sets
regulación
board meetings as a maximum of 3
que
hours.
pone los juntas del comité
We're
por un
on,
máximo de
you know,
3 horas.
approaching hour 2 right now. And most of our board meetings will be able to achieve our work within the 3-hour time period, but the board has the discretion to extend the board meeting if there's items that require a longer board meeting. They can do it, you know, at the dais and just say, you know, we need additional time, let's vote to extend the meeting by another half an hour if necessary, or whatever the time period is. But staff will do their best to present items in a manner that will allow us to meet our 3-hour normal deadline.
Podemos alcanzar nuestro límite de 3 horas,
It
que
sounds
es
like,
normal.
sorry, Board Member
No,
Bartlett.
you're good.
It sounds like kind of the
Se oye
option
como que
is we could
opción
maybe have monthly meetings
que
that are
tengamos
about an hour and a
juntas-
half long, or have meetings every other month that are about 3 hours with, that's your anticipation of the
Lo
volume
que
of work?
anticipa que podemos
Correct.
tener juntas mensuales que duren
So
1 hora y
we'd be
media
meeting
o
for the same amount of
juntas
time,
cada
it's
otro
just, do we
mes
want to
que
meet for
tarde
shorter amounts of time
3 horas.
every month? And
Entonces,
have
es
that
la mismo
have the
tiempo
impact on
de
staff
juntas,
that has been stated,
nomás
or do we
que
want
las
to
opciones
meet
van a ser
for
diferencia
a
entre,
longer time but meet every other month?
entre
and,
tener juntas de 1 hora y
And I
media
think that, for me,
solamente
I
cada
like, I
mes,
have a question about that,
a
like,
tener
is there an advantage to
juntas cada
tenants,
mes de
is there
3
an
horas.
advantage to landlords to
Pues,
having
hay
monthly
una
meetings
ventaja para los
versus
inquilinos y
every
para
other month?
los
And I
dueños
don't
de
know.
los apartamentos. Hay una,
Excuse me, people from the audience are not allowed to speak at this time, thank you.
May I?
Yes, Board Member Hay.
If a landlord or a renter, either one, has a serious problem that needs addressing, we can have a special meeting. I think
si un
that
inquilino
could,
o
would
un
take care of
dueño de
that.
apartamentos tiene una
I'm
asunto
seriously concerned
especial,
about
por eso se
overloading
puede
the
usar
staff
una junta especial.
when one of our big priorities
preocupación
is
es-
outreach. And I think
es
part of the
poner
outreach has to go to
sobrepeso
landlords so
mucho
that they
peso en los-
understand
en el equipo cuando nuestro
that
meta es
everything
alcance de la
is,
comunidad.
it's all in the law, it's all very narrow. So we need to reach out to everybody, but primarily
Tenemos
to
que
people
alcanzar a
that
todos,
are not
principalmente
English speakers, you
a
know.
los que no
'Cause
son-
you're right, that's,
habla
it's very
inglés,
important.
hablantes
muy
de
importante.
inglés. Eso es lo que estamos tratando de
¿Puedo
alcanzar.
hablar?
Yeah, Board Member Espinoza.
Miembro Espinosa?
Yo sigo con la opción A.
I maintain with option A.
Como dijeron, pueden ser las reuniones más cortas.
Like you said, we can make the meeting shorter.
A ustedes les bajará, de todas maneras están poniendo un personal más para que no tengan tanto estrés.
Either way, you're taking on more staff to have less stress on each of you.
De todas maneras también se le estaría reduciendo los costos a las personas, bueno, a los landlords.
Either way, you would be reducing the cost to landlords.
Y creo que tendríamos todavía más servicios. Así que creo que la opción A es la que podemos tener.
And I believe that we'll still be offering more services. So I believe that option A, we should go with option A.
Si pensamos de esa manera, que vamos a estar aquí cada 2 meses, no vamos a tener el alcance que realmente queremos.
If we have the mentality that we're only going to meet every other month, then we're not going to achieve the outreach that we want.
Si hacemos eso,
If
las
we do that,
reuniones van a ser más 3 horas, dice.
if we do that, you say that the meetings will be 3-hour meetings.
Esperemos que más gente comience a venir.
Do we hope that more people are going to start coming?
Y si vinieran, no tendrían tanto tiempo para hablar.
And if they were to come, they would not have that much time to speak.
Entonces, el tiempo que le estaremos reduciendo a las personas que asisten, tal vez sería solo 30 segundos o 1 minuto.
So the time that we would be reducing to the people who attend would maybe be 30 seconds or maybe up to a minute.
Sigo pensando que la opción A nos está dando lo que necesitamos hasta ahora.
So I maintain that option A is giving us what we've needed up to this point.
Board Member Cantor, can I speak to that? real quick?
Yes.
Just to be clear, staff cannot do option A. It's just not feasible. It's, the reality is that if we approve option A, we will budget for those meetings, but in all likelihood, we not only will be negatively impacting staff, but there's a very good possibility that on a regular basis, we will not meet the deadlines necessary to hold those meetings monthly. So in addition to stressing staff, and when you stress staff, you increase attrition, you increase the chances of legal issues that come up. So in the end, the board could adopt option A, but the staff would not be able to execute on option A in a monthly basis. It would be almost impossible. I think we could keep our meetings to very minimal items, but then we would not be able to achieve our mission. That we would not be able to bring to the board the number of items that we need to bring and the complexity of the items that we need to bring. I am very concerned that option A would result, even with additional staff, would result in us kind of setting ourselves up for failure. Setting ourselves up to not be able to achieve what we should be achieving.
So I have another question. If we went, so it's my understanding that if we went with option A, we could still make the decision to cancel meetings.
Correct.
Just because the meetings are scheduled doesn't mean that they need to be held. And if we went with option B, then we would have the ability to add meetings. Just because we're saying there's only 7 meetings, we could still include more if we needed to.
That's correct.
So it's just a question about what the kind of default case is.
That's right. That's a perfect way to put it.
No podríamos preparar todo a tiempo. Pero si hiciéramos la opción B, siempre tendríamos la posibilidad de agregar otra junta, porque son menos juntas al año y siempre hay espacio para pedir otra junta especial.
Entonces vamos por la A y veamos cómo nos va.
Una vez más, señora, no lo escuché.
Vamos con la A, bueno, yo sigo con la A y veamos cómo nos va.
Okay, well, I maintain with option A, and let's see how it goes.
Estamos aquí todos creo que por una cosa, que es servir a la comunidad.
We're all
Ese es
here,
nuestro
I believe,
punto
for
de
one
estar
thing.
aquí.
We're all here, I believe, for one thing, which is to serve the community. This is why we are here.
To be fair, I just have a quick question, comment for my experience right now, like, we don't see much of the public
No
here
vemos mucho
for our
del
meetings
público-
already.
del
So
público
I
aquí para
do
nuestras
understand
juntas.
where
Entonces, yo
Board Member
entiendo
Height
que-
was coming from
que
and like
dice
increase our
Member
outreach
Height,
so people can show
que
up
podemos
for
incrementar
the
nuestro
alternative
alcance
meetings. Because right
comunitario
now the
para
people
que
that we're
más
talking
gente
about
venga.
serving, they're not here and they're
Porque
not
ahorita
showing up
de
to the
los que
meetings.
hablamos de que
At
queremos
least for
servir,
me,
no
as
están aquí.
also a renter and
Y para
someone who
mí,
worked
también como
full time, I
rentador
went
y
through
también
the
como alguien
the
que
board
sirvió
process,
a tiempo
and
completo, yo
it was
fui por el
very.
proceso
I
de
had to
miembro
take
del
time off
comité.
work, and
Yo
I was
tenía que
not
tomar
able to
tiempo libre
attend
del
the meetings
trabajo,
regularly.
y aún
But I
así no
showed
podía
up
tener las
to
juntas
my scheduled appointments, so
regularmente, pero yo
that's
sí-
still
sí
an
llegaba
option.
a las juntas que
And I
tenía
mean, from
en el
experience,
schedule.
like the public we're trying to
eso es
reach,
por
they're
mi
not showing up
experiencia.
right now. So if they,
El
we
público
still
que llegamos
have
a alcanzar
them
no están aquí
um,
ahorita.
informed
Sí,
and
entonces
doing
los
the outreach
mantenemos
that we need to,
informados y
then
hacemos
maybe
el
that
alcance
could
al público
change,
que
but
se necesita.
what we see right
Quizás
now,
eso
it's
cambiará,
not
pero
happening,
ahorita
even
lo que
for
vemos
city
ahorita no
council
está
meetings.
ocurriendo, aún para
They
las
don't
juntas
show up
del-
unless
del
it's
Concilio
something
de la
important in
ciudad.
the agenda
No,
that they want
no-
to speak
no
on.
se presentan a menos que
So
haya
I don't
algo en
think
la
that
agenda
it
que
would
ellos quieren
reduce
platicar.
the service and us being available for the public. I think it would just be more like, they have to show up for the certain meetings.
Entonces no creo que vamos a
So
reducir
I would
el servicio público,
recommend for you to
nomás que
consider that
ellos-
as well.
ellos van a saber que si quieren tocar un tema tienen que reunirse en las juntas. Entonces yo pido que usted considere eso también, señora Espinosa.
En mi experiencia trabajando con la comunidad,
In my experience of working with the community,
tengo más de 15 años siendo voluntaria en diferentes organizaciones.
I have more than 15 years being a volunteer at various organizations.
La gente no va porque no sabe que no hay traducción.
The people do not go because they know that there is no translation or interpretation.
La gente no va porque no se siente bienvenida.
The people do not come because they do not feel welcome.
La gente no va porque en muchas ocasiones ni tan siquiera sabe que existen estas reuniones.
People don't go because on many occasions they don't even know that these meetings exist.
Por esa razón a mí me encantan los datos,
That's why I love data.
porque de esa manera puedo saber qué realmente es lo que han hecho para saber cuánto es el alcance que han tenido.
That way I can know exactly what has been done and what outreach that has led to.
Si comenzamos a cambiar algo que es, bueno, esto solamente lo quieren cambiar porque dicen que es mucho estrés el hecho de interpretar, pero si
So this you only want to change it because you say it'd be too much stress to reach the deadlines for translation services.
¿cómo han trabajado hasta ahora con la comunidad latina si de todas maneras es estresante para ellos trabajar con ellos?
How have you worked with the Latinx community if either way it has been stressful for them to be involved?
¿Cómo quieren que venga la comunidad latina hacia ustedes? Y somos una mayoría. Si ustedes desde el principio no se sienten bienvenidos.
How can we expect them to come if we, being the majority, do not make them feel welcome and inviting to come?
Por esa razón yo digo que sigamos con la A.
That is why
Porque
I
necesitamos tener
maintain.
más alcance.
That is why I maintain with option A because we need more outreach.
Y lo pongo desde mi propia experiencia trabajando en la comunidad.
And I speak from my own experience as working with the community.
I definitely understand where you're coming from. Board Member Espinosa, I've been a
Member
community
Espinosa.
organizer for the past 15 years too.
Sí,
And
sí,
from my
he sido
experience in organizing, people
participante
don't
por
always
más
show
de
up
15
because they don't
años.
have the capacity. People are
Muchas veces la gente no viene
working
porque no
more
tenemos la
often,
capacidad.
and not everybody has the luxury of,
Muchos
having
están
that
trabajando
time
y no
to
todos tienen
volunteer
el
and
lujo
come
de
to
venir
meetings.
para estas juntas y ser
But
partícipe de estas
again,
juntas.
you have some really, really important and good points. So
Y una
to
vez más,
be
usted tiene
completely
unos puntos
honest,
muy
I
importantes. Para
may
ser
need a little
honesto,
longer to think about it.
Yo quizás voy a necesitar más tiempo para pensarlo.
May I have the floor?
Yes, Board Member Height.
I think
tomar
we
el
can do
piso?
this,
Yo creo que si hacemos
the
esto,
outreach with,
el alcance de la
we could
comunidad,
start with 6 meetings,
podemos
and
empezar
if we
con 6
need to
juntas
extend them, we can always add more.
y si necesitamos
I just worry
extenderlo,
about
siempre
the
podemos
staff,
agregar
you
más.
know.
Yo
And
simplemente me preocupo
we
por
have a
los
really good
personajes.
rent board. And,
Porque nosotros tenemos
I
un
was
comité
also
de
involved. I had to march around
de-
for 4 years to get the rent.
renta que
you know, to get the rent laws
se
passed.
cambia y yo tuve que
And,
marchar por 4 años para tener esta posición.
it's a fragile thing, so
Es algo muy
I think we
frágil.
should take smaller steps. I
Yo creo que
understand what you're
debemos de tomar
saying, I
pasos
really appreciate
pequeños.
it.
Yo entiendo lo que
But
usted
we
dice
can
y se lo
add more
aprecio mucho.
meetings. If it
Pero
looks
podemos
like
agregar más
it's going to
juntas.
work, we can always add more
Y si,
meetings.
y
But
si-
if we
y
go
si
with
se mira
option A,
que está funcionando, siempre podemos agregar
we're
más
just-
juntas.
I just feel
Pero si
it's too
vamos
much
con
of
la
a burnout
opción
for the
A, yo
staff.
siento que va a ser
And I
mucha
agree with
presión para
everything you're
nuestros
saying.
personajes. Pero yo estoy de acuerdo con todo lo que usted está diciendo, señor Espinosa.
¿Puedo contestar lo que dijo el señor?
May I respond to the sir?
Entonces también podríamos hacer la opción A. De todas maneras, el señor Nicolás Traynor dijo que si ellos no se sentían con la capacidad, tal vez iban a cancelar la reunión. Podemos ir con la opción A y de todas maneras ellos están cancelando reuniones y no se sienten preparados.
Well, in the same way, we can go with option A because our attorney mentioned, or one of the gentlemen over there mentioned, if we see that we cannot be adequately prepared before the meeting, we can always cancel a meeting.
Casi sería lo mismo, estaríamos haciendo tal vez reuniones menos porque ellos no están preparados para una reunión al próximo mes.
It's almost the same thing because we may be canceling meetings because we're not ready for next month's meeting.
Can I? I'm sorry,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
go with Board Member Hay.
No, go ahead.
It's really about, what I'm worried about is staff. Because it's overloading, it's overloading the current staff that we have by choosing A. I just think we'd be smarter to do B and take a smaller step
Si vamos con la opción
towards this.
solo creo que
I
sería
think we
más
need to
prudente
protect
empezar con la
what
opción B para
we've
tomar.
achieved. And I just feel
Creo que debemos de
that
proteger lo que ya hemos logrado.
it's too fast a
Entonces siento que es
move.
muy pronto.
Mr. Trailer, did you have a comment?
Yeah, so as we're preparing for board meetings,
Mientras vamos prepararnos para
there's a lot of
juntas
other
del comité,
activities going on. We have to manage the whole rent program, which includes
todo el programa de renta,
doing all of our outreach, community workshops, counseling, mediation, petitions, rent adjustment petitions, keeping all of that running and staying on top of all of those things, in addition to preparing everything for each board meeting. So it can have the impact, and I think it would have the impact, that we would have to take from other resources, take staff away from focusing on some of the other things that they normally would do to make sure we did our best to meet these deadlines, which are almost unachievable. I mean, they may be at some point in the future when the technology improves, when we figure out how to maybe we get a new provider that can provide a quicker turnaround. But as it currently stands, we would negatively be affecting the agency. And if we negatively affect the agency, that impacts our ability to perform the basic services that we provide, whether it's counseling, whether it's collection of the rental housing fee, or making sure that properties are in compliance with the rent ordinance, and property owners are in compliance. And all of that work, it's a constant struggle and battle, just like with many professions, to stay on top of your daily work. And if you're putting yourself in a situation where you're creating deadlines that are almost unachievable, then you are going to impact that other work, in addition to burning staff out. We have staff right now who hold many hats. Cynthia Shaw is the hearings coordinator, board clerk, my assistant, legal coordinator. Ramona wears a variety of hats. Most of our staff wear many, many hats and juggle many, many different things. And holding, setting ourselves up potentially for staff burnout and trying to reach deadlines that might very well be totally unrealistic is, in my opinion, is not recommended. I think it would potentially hurt the board long term because the agency itself would be impacted.
Tengo una opción. ¿Puedo hablar?
Yes, and then I have a comment.
Ok.
Negativamente.
Si yo se diera a que fuera la B,
If I were to suggest, si usted qué, señora?
si yo votara por la B,
If I were to vote for option B,
lo que pido es que se mantenga el costo que aquí se pone sobre las unidades.
what I would ask is that the cost of per unit that's written here would be maintained.
No se bajaran los costos y nos dieran un análisis de qué manera van ustedes a tener mayor alcance a la comunidad.
I would ask that the fees not be reduced and that you provide an analysis of how we're going to perform our community outreach.
So this is a legal response just to part of the question. The fee, so the rent ordinance requires that anything you charge be reasonable and necessary, and that it be corresponded to a line item. That means your fee has to be directly related to what your expenditures are. So you can't pick and choose what your fee is. Your fee is, you have a total budget. Oh, I see that you're nodding, so you likely understand. Okay.
Estoy entendiendo esa parte. Lo
I'm
único que estoy
understanding that
diciendo es
part.
que entonces ustedes nos presenten un valle diciéndonos de qué manera o qué opciones tienen para tener mayor alcance.
What I'm asking is that you provide us a plan or data on how it is you propose to or you expect to perform the community outreach that you are promising.
Y si nos pueden dar datos de qué es lo que han alcanzado anteriormente.
And if you could provide us data of what you have achieved previously.
So we certainly intend to bring our comprehensive outreach plan before the board, but I would ask board members to go to our website and you can look at all of the workshops that we have held. You can look at all of the outreach materials that we send out. You can look at our annual reports that explain all of the services, how many rent increase notices we receive and process from landlords who are required to give us rent increase notices when they raise the rent. All of the eviction notices that we receive when a landlord serves a tenant an eviction notice, we receive a copy. The landlord is required to give us a copy. We do outreach associated with that. I think part of the issue is that we haven't had the opportunity to give the full training to board member Espinoza, and I think going through that will help explain the voluminous amount of work that we've done outreach-wise already and continue to do. We've done over 60 workshops and webinars with over 1,000 attendees. We've counseled over 30,000 residents. That's a third of Richmond's population. So we have done a lot of outreach and education. But I think we'll, as I mentioned, we'll bring the comprehensive outreach plan before the board so that they can give us additional feedback and suggestions.
Yo he visto exactamente eso, lo que está diciendo, lo de la media, lo de los workshops que hacen.
I've seen exactly that you just mentioned, all the things you provide and all the workshops that you've performed.
Aquí lo que estoy pidiendo son sus datos, que me digan cuánta gente fue a ese, cuánto ha aumentado del año pasado a este año y qué es su meta para ustedes para el próximo año, porque creo que te han de tener una meta, ¿no?
What I'm looking at is the data that you've presented us right now, where it says what have been the changes and what are your goals for next year? Because I imagine you have goals for next year.
Y qué cosas nuevas estarían implementando.
And I would like to see what new things you're implementing.
Por eso estoy diciendo que tal vez podemos dejar lo que están diciendo aquí, que se va a cobrar, si podemos usar ese dinero para implementar, a tener mayor alcance a la comunidad o dar más servicios.
That is why I'm maintaining to do what you're offering here, where we can offer those decreases to the community, and we can still perform the outreach to the community so they can be better served.
I think it would be helpful, and we are we have scheduled a series of trainings that we've done with other board members. We'd like to do it as well with you, Board Member Espinoza, to make sure that it's happening tomorrow, actually. And we're going to go over all of those stats. We're going to go over all of the activities, the history. There's a lot to make sure that you know about. And that will, and we're also available for any board member to set up meetings to ask any questions that board members need to ask, and including, you know, these questions about how much have you done so far, what are your plans going forward, and we're happy to provide that information to Board Member Espinosa or any other board member.
So I just have a couple of comments. So one is just clarifying that tonight, we're not voting on the budget. We are not approving the budget. What we're voting on is how we want to direct staff to design the budget that we will be voting on next month. So if we make a decision tonight and then, whatever decision we make tonight is not final. So that's the first thing. And then I also want to talk about staff burnout at a small organization. I recently left my job of many years because of burnout. I was working as the director of operations, wearing a lot of different hats at an organization. And we were trying our best to provide services to the community, to provide the highest level of service to the community. Some of the decisions that we made about how to do that included just adding more and more work to the plate of the people who were currently on staff, because that didn't cost additional money. And so in trying to provide the highest level of service without spending more money, we increased the workload for everybody. We did hire a couple of additional people, but they were brand new, didn't have any institutional history in the organization. And what ended up happening is I left because of burnout, and many of my other coworkers left because of burnout as well. And that organization is now really struggling to survive, because all the people who had the history there could not manage the work. And so I do, right now, it seems like, from the impression that I get, is that staff are happy and they're doing their work and they're doing a good job. And I do have serious concerns about adding to what they're doing, because this office assistant will be doing just the new things. Like the office assistant can't take work away from Cynthia, can't take work away from Ramona.
No le puedes quitar el trabajo de Cynthia o Ramona.
You know, that week turnaround time is about being responsive to the board meeting and preparing for the next board meeting.
Sería ser
So yes, they can start preparing for the July board meeting before we had the June board meeting, but then with everything that we ask for, that we say we want this at the next meeting, that only gives them a week to do that work. And
todo lo que
during that
pidamos en la
week,
junta, y digamos
if
esto es lo que
Cynthia
queremos por
is
esta
spending all
semana,
of her time doing
solo
board
tendrá una
clerk
semana
work, that means that
para
she's
preparar
not
eso.
spending time doing hearing coordinator work, she's not spending time doing legal coordinator work, she's not spending time
Señor Cynthia,
doing
estás
all
tomando
of the other
sus
parts
tiempos
of
por
her
preparar
job that
estas juntas y no
involve
está haciendo sus
connecting
otros
directly
deberes
with
como sus
our
otros papeles
residents
de
and
trabajo.
our housing providers, and making sure that people are getting the services that they need. So for me, I'm leaning towards option B, and it's because
Por
I
eso yo
really feel that
Yo
concern.
estoy
I think it's a
dirigiéndome a la
serious
opción B
thing.
porque yo
It's not just
siento que eso
about
es algo muy
the
serio.
mindset of the staff, or
Y
like
no
they're going
solamente
to
es sobre
be
el
sad
pensamiento
or
del
unhappy because
personaje,
they
si
have to
vamos a
do
estar
this work.
feliz o
I
tristes
worry that
porque
it would really take away from the services we can offer to
pero le aviso que
Richmond residents.
verdaderamente le va a quitar servicios que ofrecemos a la comunidad si vamos con la opción A.
Yo sigo con...
I maintain
¿Me escucha?
option A.
Así. Sigo con la opción A, porque de todas maneras estaremos aumentando 2 personas más a su personal.
Because either way, we would be adding 2 more people to the staff.
Creo que hasta ahorita han hecho un buen trabajo, gracias.
I think up to this point, you've done a great job. Thank you.
Y precisamente la persona que pusieron aquí dicen que se va a dedicar solamente a hacer eso. La
And,
persona adicional que pusieron en el budget.
and the person that you've added onto the budget would dedicate themselves to doing only that job, those specific tasks.
Por esa razón creo que podemos optar por la opción A, porque todavía ellos están poniendo que van a poner 2 personales más. El que debían puesto en el anterior y este. Ellos nos dijeron que son 2 personas más para su nuevo para aumentar su personal.
Because you already said that you're going to be adding another person, which is 1 more than the previous person. So you're already adding on people to the staff to take on the extra workload that we'd be bringing on ourselves.
Creo que eso no les pondría tanto estrés porque hasta en las calificaciones que ellos pusieron ponen que precisamente es la persona que se dedicaría a ayudar con la traducción, ¿Me escuchas, Josué?
Sí. I think that it wouldn't add too much pressure because you've already dictated what that person would be doing, which is running the systems for the interpretation and assisting in the interpretation and the translations of the documents,
Preparar los documentos,
preparing the documents,
organizar la logística,
organizing the logistics,
las reuniones bilingües.
having our meetings be bilingual.
Ellos pusieron aquí todas sus calificaciones, que
You
son
put here-
exactamente lo que tendrían sobrecarga, ya lo tendría esta persona.
So that is you've already specified here what all their tasks would be. So that burnout that you're afraid of, we've already dictated how the workload is going to be dispersed amongst 2 more staff personnel.
So I just would say that what I'm hearing as like the additional
Lo que yo
work
estoy
that is too much
Oyendo sobre el
is
trabajo que sería
having
mucho.
that week of turnaround time
Es que
to
teniendo
prepare
solamente una
documents
semana para
in
preparar
English to then send
documentos
to the translator.
En inglés
So,
para mandárselo al
For
traductor.
example, tonight
ejemplo,
you're saying you want to
tarde
see the
usted-
comprehensive outreach plan.
Ha dicho que quiere
If-
un plan
If
de alcance
our next meeting is in a month
comprensivo.
and we're having everything translated by a certified
Si
translator to make sure that it can be presented to
nuestra
the public
siguiente
in
junta
Spanish, which
es
I
en
think
un
is
mes
very
y
important,
necesitamos que todo sea
then that means that they
traducido
only
por
have
alguien
1 week
certificado.
to finalize
Quiere decir
that
que solo
report
tenemos una semana para
for
finalizar
the
ese
next
reporte
meeting. And they
para la
wouldn't be able to
próxima
change
junta
anything
y
on
no se
it
podría
after
cambiar
that
nada
week because it would have
después de
already
esa
been sent
semana
off to the
porque
translator and
ya habría
finalized.
sido mandado al
And
traductor.
so neither of the new staff would be doing that work.
Entonces,
It
ninguno
would
de
be
los
the
dos
existing
personajes
staff, it would
nuevos
be the
estarían
people
haciendo
who
ese
are,
trabajo.
responsible for coming up with the comprehensive outreach plan, not the new office assistants that would be doing that.
Entonces esos nuevos 2 personajes no estarían en cargo de creando un plan extensivo para alcanzar la comunidad.
No, ese no es su trabajo precisamente, pero el trabajo extra que ellos están diciendo que se va a hacer es exactamente el personal extra el que lo estaría haciendo, porque el del alcance de la comunidad, ese ya es su trabajo de ellos de todas maneras.
I understand that those new tasks of translating and preparing translation and interpretation will not go to the new staff personnel because but the creating the creative and extensive outreach program plan that already befalls on us. I understand that it will not go to those 2 new personnel that you've wrote into the budget.
Dijo lo que yo dije.
Sorry, you said that the outreach plan is our responsibility to create, the board?
Usted dijo que
No, no, eso no, es el de ellos.
Oh, okay, great.
sorry about that.
Okay, great, sorry. Okay, so do we have any more discussion at this time?
Entonces tenemos más
No, I'm ready
discusiones
to
en
move
este
forward.
tiempo.
No.
No, yo estoy listo para proseguir.
I guess I don't want to be the one to officially make a motion, but I would like to say that I'd be interested in potentially increasing the interpretation to have 2 interpreters instead of 1. the additional cost to do that is minimal in the scope of the budget. And so whichever option we go with, I would suggest that as a friendly amendment. Would anybody like to make a motion?
Yo no quiero ser el que empiece la moción, pero yo siento que se le debe agregar a estas dos opciones que a los dos tengan esa opción de agregar un segundo intérprete para hacer las interpretaciones. Pero necesito que alguien haga esa moción.
So do we have to do them individually, just one at a time?
Let's figure out. So, Board Member Guadalupe, would you like to make a motion?
Member
Make a
Guadalupe.
motion for whatever you'd like, and then we can tell you if it needs to be different.
Okay. So, I was wondering, like, do we just, like, let's vote on F1, or do we have to say, like, what option you're going with?
Yeah, you have to say what you want to be the result, what you want to vote for.
Understood, okay. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, let's see. I would like to make a motion for
Sería
us
hacer una
to
moción para
vote on F1
nosotros votemos sobre F1
and vote on option, the recommended budget option B, and to make an amendment
sobre votar
and
en
add
opción B,
two
y
interpreters instead
agregar
of one.
un aumento para tener dos intérpretes en las dos opciones.
Do we have a second?
I'll
¿Alguien
second.
Lo segundo, yo seré el segundo.
Okay, I'll take a vote.
Entonces vamos a votar.
Board Member Espinoza,
Señor
No.
Espinoza? No.
Board Member Height,
Yes.
Ay, sí.
Vice Chair Guadalupe,
Señor
Yes.
Guadalupe, sí.
and Chair Cantor.
Yes.
Cantor, sí.
Motion passes with
Moción está pasado.
Board Member Dockin absent
Con
for
Jackie
option
ausente
B to include
opción B.
additional interpreter.
Para incluir un intérprete adicional.
The next item on the agenda is report of officers.
Siguiente artículo. en la
No
agenda
report
es
of officers,
reporte
although
de los oficiales.
we will be
Reporte de los oficiales.
having,
Sí tendremos
we'll be checking with board members in the near future about scheduling the final budget meeting in late June.
acompañar el último presupuesto para finales de
Excuse me, when is the next board, the regular
June
next?
21st?
June 21st, yes, so June 21st. And then on the, I think we're anticipating going before the city council on the 27th.
Anticipamos ir delante
To
de
get the
la
fees
ciudad de
adopted.
la ciudad
And
el
at
27.
that next meeting,
En esa próxima
we
junta.
will, I believe by law, need to vote to approve a
Tenemos
budget.
que votar por
Correct.
ley
So I
para
recommend
aprobar
that
un
any board
presupuesto.
members who have
Entonces, yo
questions or
recomiendo que cualquier
information that they would like to be
miembro del comité
considered,
que tenga
you
una
can ask
pregunta o
for,
una
can you
sugerencia
present
que
us a
quiere
budget that
presentar,
has these
tiene que
options in it? We
presenta
can
un
ask
presupuesto que
staff
tenga
to
eso, se
present
puede
multiple
pedir
budget
a
options.
los personajes
So
para
for the
presentar esas
concerns that you
opciones.
have, just recommend
preocupaciones que usted tenga.
talking with staff directly ahead of time
Recomiendo que hable
so
con
that
el-
those
con
can
el
be brought to us.
personaje
No.
antes de ese tiempo.
Yeah, close though. Because, so we're gonna have to publish the option B with the additional interpreter. That budget is published in the public newspaper. And so that's the budget you're gonna be considering. But I do agree generally with your recommendation. If you have questions generally about all the stuff you've asked, outreach,
Lo que se
mom and
quema
pops,
presupuesto
whatever
se
you
tendrá que
want, you
publicar
should
en
definitely
un
talk to us
diario
before that.
de la
If you,
ciudad.
if the budget comes before you,
Si un
at our next
presupuesto llega
meeting,
delante de usted
and
para el
you
próximo junta,
slept on it and you say, you know what, maybe option B wasn't the best, maybe I want all these other things, what would happen is you would
Si
not
cree que,
vote for that
quizás-
presented budget, and you would schedule another meeting in the future for another budget to be presented to you. That makes
Si mira
sense.
que
We would have
quizás
to
en la
again
próxima junta,
repost
oh, ya
whatever the
no
board tells
cambié
us
de mente y no
is
quiero
their
lo que
desired
se ofrece
budget,
de la
and
opción
then we
B.
go through the process
Entonces no
again.
votaría por opción B, votaría
If
para
you don't
otro
get your
análisis y
budget
otro cambio,
adopted
otro voto para el-
before the end of the
el
fiscal
presupuesto.
year,
Y
it's
si no
very
votan en-
troubling,
si no votan
because we
en-
just
en el
won't have
presupuesto para final
money
del año
to,
fiscal,
we won't be able to spend money.
no vamos a
Because everything we
muy
spend
preocupante
now,
porque no
it's already
podríamos gastar dinero,
budgeted
porque
for
todo lo que
in this
gastamos
fiscal year, and
ahorita
as a line item for everything we do.
ha
It doesn't
ha
carry
sido
over to the next fiscal
guiñado
year,
en el
so
en el
we would,
presupuesto.
we would be in a lot of trouble.
Entonces seríamos en gran problema si
So,
no aprobáramos un presupuesto
By
para el
voting on
próximo año.
this, we no longer have the option to ask for things like, what would it look like to do more sponsored posts on social media, something like that. We no longer have the option to ask for any of those things.
You can ask, in terms of, you mean, by what you say, what does it look like? You mean like costs, right?
Yeah, so if we were to, for example, we've been discussing outreach. We have been assured that there's a comprehensive outreach plan. We haven't seen that outreach plan yet. That's going to be coming to us next meeting. If after we see the outreach plan, we say, actually, we think that we should allocate more funds to outreach, would we have the option to do that at the next meeting?
I see. So yes, you could allocate more funds. However, it would require then that you do not adopt a budget that is currently in front of you for the next meeting, and staff come back with the newly allocated funds for outreach. So you always have the option to say no to the budget, and even if it runs into the next fiscal year, we just have to take it. It'd be terrible, but you would still be able to do it. If you wanted to get it done before the 21st, for instance, right? So we need 10 days for posting, right? Let's say you, I guess I didn't follow that conversation, but if there was a promise to bring to you the comprehensive outreach plan for the next meeting, and that's going to impact your decision on this budget, what I would probably recommend is right now, or maybe not right now, maybe staff can email you all, but to hold another special meeting with a very quick turnaround, where you have a comprehensive, where you have a discussion on the comprehensive outreach plan with the amount that's allocated for that plan. And then you guys can have a whole robust discussion on whether or not that amount's sufficient, and if it's not sufficient, you can direct staff to include in that budget, X amount of money. What would likely happen is we would just bring the line item, the specific line item to you, right? And you would say, I want you to increase the specific line item. And again, because it's important for the agenda language to be broad enough, you would only be able to discuss outreach, everything in the plan, and whatever ideas you may or may not have, plus the costs associated with that plan.
Okay, so that would need to then be next week, the 7th, correct, in order to have that information in time to post on the 11th for the meeting on the 21st.
If the math works, I'm not sure, but I always try to afford myself an extra day rather than running up exactly on that day. So for instance, if the 11th was 10 days and the meeting was the 21st, I would probably say the 10th to give yourself
But next Wednesday is the 7th, so if we're doing a special meeting on a Wednesday, it would have to be next Wednesday, correct? We couldn't go to the 14th. The 14th is too
You
late.
cannot go to the 14th.
So, board, do we want to schedule a special meeting for next week to discuss the outreach plan so that we can potentially adjust the outreach budget if we feel it's necessary?
May I have the floor?
Yes, Mr. Board Member Height.
I think we're all so new to what we're doing here. I almost think we should just stick with what we've got now. And then if we're all in this for the long term, we have up to 6 years, I think, that we can serve on the board. And I think the board has done a great job, because as I say, I've been involved in this since the very beginning, I was walking the streets, getting petitions, signed and stuff. I think what we've got is really good. We're all beginners. I think that we should spend the first year figuring it all out rather than trying to implement what we want to do initially without really understanding everything real well. In other words, we have to learn the flow and everything. So I think we should be patient. Thank you.
Board members Espinoza and Guadalupe?
I personally would find that helpful to have a special meeting next week.
Yo también creo que la reunión especial estaría bien.
I
Los
also
cambios que se están pidiendo.
think the special meeting would be a good idea to do to get what's being asked of us to get.
So what I would recommend is staff schedule that special meeting it does not have to be on a Wednesday,
Yo
but we can
recomendaría
send an
que
email
el
out to all the board
personaje
members, probably
planea
tomorrow,
esa junta
and,
especial, no tiene que ser un miércoles. Lo
see
pueden planear,
where
lo contactan
everyone's
ustedes
available.
para que
Because,
sea
yeah,
mañana.
I'm just worried if we put it to, I'm just worried about the timing, and I haven't looked at the
Sos
10 days. And
preocupado sobre el tiempo.
I'm tired and I can't
We
do
don't
10
know
days.
if another board is meeting in here at that time or
Right,
something like
Sabemos si
that.
otro comité está juntándose aquí en ese
Okay,
tiempo.
so,
Oh, and, I'm sorry, and ordinarily, I just want to quickly respond to Board Member Height, right? Board Member Height's comment. Ordinarily, I think it's correct. Or ordinarily, because you all are sitting right now and you're kind of thrown into the whirlpool and it's the budget, but it's not that much time, and you're asked to do so many things with so little information, that's unordinary, or that's not ordinary. Ordinarily, you would have sat throughout the whole fiscal year with already had a budget. You would have had several meetings over the community outreach stuff or whatever else things you're interested in, so that when your budget actually comes before you, you would have a greater sense of what we've been doing historically and what we intend to do. I would just, but I'm glad you're all having this conversation, but I would just, just caution or temper your expectations, because one meeting may not be enough for you all to really grasp what's going on that side. So, but I hear the scheduling, and I don't want to violate the Brown Act, so we will email you all and figure it out what date you want.
so, I'd like to make sure that that meeting would meet everyone's needs. I definitely heard a strong desire to review the outreach plan prior to voting on a budget. Is there anything else that we would want to make sure we discuss prior to because after we have that meeting, we would not be able to make any more changes to the budget without going into the next fiscal year. So is there anything else that we should make sure we agendize for the next meeting?
So can I just recommend,
Yeah.
because I don't want to violate the Brown Act,
Yeah.
typically what would happen is when you approved your prior item, you would have told us to come back in X amount of days with the comprehensive plan and all that other stuff that you would have been able to discuss. But because this is report of officers and scheduling, as you'll see, there's like nothing there. We can't really get into the meat and potatoes, everything. So what I would suggest is we send out an email. This is not how it should happen, because the board is the entity that directs staff, not an individual person. But because it's new, it's whatever. But we will send out the email, and you can include in your email response what you would like us to bring back to you for that special meeting. Together.
Great, so it sounds like there are 3 people who are in favor of having a special meeting next week. Staff will email us about scheduling that, and then we can respond to that staff email. Only staff, not emailing each other with anything that we want to make sure we talk about on that meeting, because that would be our last meeting before we're given the budget, and then have to say just yes or no to it. We can't make any more changes.
That's correct, and that's extraordinary for everyone on this board. If you email us and you tell us what you want, we will not do it. Only the board can tell us what they want, not an individual board member. If you vote on it, they can tell us. But this time, we will make that exception.
Great, yeah, thank you. And I apologize for not understanding the process, and so definitely next year, we'll do it different.
You're doing great, you're doing great.
All right, so I think that we don't have anything else for the reports of officers and scheduling, correct? So, meeting adjourned at 7:42 PM.
Thank you.
Great job, everyone.
Thanks.